that's happening actually across racial groups. But what about other things? I mean, what about redlining? Do you think that that had an effect on the Black family? What about mass incarceration? What about the war on drugs, which was pushed by a Republican president whose advisor said it was specifically to target Black people? What about all of those things?
Look, if you want to talk about redlining and a lot of the other policies that were put forward, quite frankly, by the Democrat Party, if you're going to go back to Jim Crow, because Jim Crow was Democrat policies,
well,
that's what that was.
I know that you know
Abby,
this.
Don't cut me off when I'm trying to make a point.
Let me just,
Abby.
I have to correct on a factual point here. I know that you know that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party.
You see, now he's a fucking douchebag. He's a fucking douchebag. Now he's starting to start using talking points. The Democratic Party was a Jim Crow. Of course, they had the great realignment. When the Democratic Party saw the civil rights movements on the crisp of giving Black people the right to vote in mass, the Democratic switched. The Democratic Party said, well, we got to embrace these new voters, an ocean of new Black voters. And they did. They carried them for another 40 years. They never won the House for 40 years, a Republican. So they switched the rule. And what happened was the Dixiecrats, who are the racists or the Southern Democrats, they went to the Republican Party. Everyone switched over. So it does. You can't say, well, the Democratic Party was a member of the KKK. Yeah, so who gives a fuck? But they switched in the 1960s. They did the great realignment. They were smart. While the Republican Party used the Southern strategy of using race and race buzzword to attract racist Southerners. It's very easy.
Party of today are ideologically not what they were during Jim Crow. You know that, Congressman. So to suggest that, you know, the Democrats of 1920 are the same ideologically as the Democrats of today is inaccurate. So just, you can continue, but I wanted to...
That's not totally true, Abby, and I think if we want to have that conversation about the policy positions between Republicans and Democrats, we can have that conversation, but
one of the other
Abby,
things...
do you want to have a conversation?
Well, one of the other things,
I'm trying to understand how you want this interview to go.
Since you brought it up on the conservative thing, the other thing that you said was Black people voted more conservatively. Were you talking about them voting for Republicans?
In part, yeah, because that's just an empirical fact. That's what we know. That did happen. And the only corollary that I am making is that when families are together and now you're trying to find a way for you to build wealth within your family unit, you're thinking about public policy in a myriad of ways. Because at the end of the day, you want your children to be able to stand on your shoulders. I was very, very fortunate. My mother was able to build a platform for me to be able to stand on and to be able to achieve. Same for my sisters. I'm a very blessed individual because of that. My only point is that when you have a family unit, husband and wife living together, striving together, grinding together, raising children together, you start thinking about public policy in a myriad of ways. And my belief is that dynamic allows people to start thinking about public policy in a much more conservative way as opposed to a much more progressive way. That's my point.
That might be, I mean, I think you're a Republican, so you're entitled to that opinion. But I think what people are taking issue with is you made a couple of statements of fact. And one of the things I was asking you about whether you were talking about Black people voting for Republicans. You know, in the time period that you're talking about, the LBJ time period, they started voting for Democrats. And the reason is because of civil rights, because a Democratic president was passing bills that gave them rights. The Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act of 1965, the Housing Fairness Act. So do you acknowledge that when Democrats Black voters vote for Democrats, it's actually because there's a history there. There's a reason that they voted for Democrats in that time period, not because they were just getting welfare money.
Abby, let me be clear. I don't deny that. I think it's also important for the record to be clear that you had the vast majority of Democrats in the Senate were filibustering the 64 Civil Rights Act led by Robert Byrd, who, by the way, was a mentor to Joe Biden when he went into the United States Senate.
So what are your thoughts on Donald's comparison to Jim Crow? Were you offended by his comments? Do you think Donald's tried to backtrack or clarify his statement effectively? Let me know in the comments. I'll see you on the next video.
All right, I hope this lady doesn't fucking complain to 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 a YouTube, because I didn't know. I thought that was a fair thing. You know, I mean, go to her channel. All right. All right. So you heard from him. So let's hear from a white guy, right? So let's hear what what's his name? There you go. Walsh, right?
An Apache helicopter,
No.
and there was a white car with special forces. The Apache started
judges. Now,
What
I don't
the
judge
fuck?
anyone based on the color of their skin or
Shut the fuck up. You know what? I need a producer. Anybody wants a job here? I got it. Okay. You know what we're gonna do here? Let me see if he's still here. He's not here. Jim. What's his name? I forgot. Matt Walsh.
Can be pretty sure of is that right now and for the last several months, the Democratic Party has been working on ways to attack every single one of those potential nominees, of course, and none of the names on the short list are a surprise. So they've presumably been digging up opposition research and monitoring everything these politicians say, hoping they can catch a slip up or take something out of context. And that's to be expected at this point, of course. But even with that expectation in mind, the attack that's unfolding right now on one of those potential vice presidential candidates, Congressman Byron Donalds of Florida, is worth talking about. It's maybe the single most revealing smear campaign of the election cycle so far. On Tuesday, Donalds was speaking at an event in Philadelphia, along with Texas Congressman Wesley Hunt. And the point of the event, apparently, was for the Trump campaign to reach more black voters by speaking honestly about the challenges that black communities are facing right now. Of course, the main challenge in black communities, as I've said many times and many other people have said, is the epidemic of fatherlessness. It's the collapse of the nuclear family. There can't be any problem bigger than that when your nuclear family has collapsed.
Okay.
Black Americans have the highest rate of out-of-wedlock births as compared to every other racial group by far.
Okay.
Roughly 77% of black children born in 2015 were out of wedlock. That's the most recent year I found data for this.
Okay.
Hispanics had a much lower rate at 56%, but still too high.
Right.
Followed by whites at 30% and Asians at 27%. All of those numbers are too high. But with the black family, the numbers are, of course, the highest. It's not a coincidence, by the way, that if you were to look at a list of average household incomes in the USA by race, it would be the exact inverse of the fatherless list. So Asians have the highest household income, followed by white, then Hispanic, then black. As far as I can tell, these numbers have held steady for decades. They've been consistent long enough that many people have come to believe that they're inevitable. But that's not true. There was, in fact, a time in American history where whites and blacks had roughly the same chances of growing up in a single family home. This was a period when most black women got married before they had kids. And it's not ancient history we're talking about. I'm talking about the first half of the 20th century, and in particular the 1950s and 60s.
Yeah.
At the event in Philadelphia, Byron Donalds addressed all of this directly. He began by talking about his own personal experiences with fatherhood. And then he pointed out that two-parent black households weren't always an anomaly. It didn't used to be this way. Watch.
During Jim Crow, the black family was together.
That's right.
During Jim Crow, more black people were not just conservative, because black people always have been conservative-minded, but more black people voted conservatively. And then H.E.W., Lyndon Johnson, and then you go down that road, and now we are where we are. What's happened in America the last 10 years, and I say it because it's my contemporaries, it's Wesley's contemporaries. You're saying now, wait, generational.
It's not even remotely debatable, in fact. From 1890 to 1950, black women had an even higher marriage rate than white women. And in the 1950s, the rates were about equal. Quoting from the Hoover Institution, in 1950, the percentages of white and African-American women aged 15 and over who are currently married were roughly the same, 67% and 64% respectively. But by 1998, the percentage of currently married white women had dropped by...
All right, shut the fuck up. You're just repeating the same shit. What are you trying to tell us? That black people are doing better by being fucking unable to drink and fucking shit in the same fucking bathroom as whites? Even if their marriages were higher, it doesn't see, my fucking chest is killing me. It doesn't prove that that Jim Crow was okay. Now we're gonna go to our favorite person. You know who it is. We had a lot of shit. Dave Rubin could suck my dick. Excuse my language. But let's add this to the.
Palestinian territories. When you look at settler colonialism in the United States and the fact that Native Americans were pushed off of their land, nobody cares that Native Americans did not have an officially recognized.
Two things can be true at the same time. That is a fact that has been all but abandoned in the fevered and polarized commentary on the Israel-Hamas war. This weekend, Israeli forces raided a refugee camp in Gaza and successfully freed 4 hostages who've been abducted at a music festival on October the 7th. The Hamas-run health ministry says that 274 people died in that raid, including children and civilians. The IDF says it killed fewer than 100 in total, including Hamas terrorists. But whatever the real figure, it's obviously horrific. This was a refugee camp. Children were killed. They are clearly innocent. It doesn't make it any less horrifying that 4 innocent Israelis were snatched by terrorists at a music festival in the first place. And no less of a triumph.
Why do we have
Israel
to mention
now brought
October
them
every
home.
time? Why?
These things can all be true at the same time. And the exact same logic applies to the war itself. Israel had no choice but to declare war on Hamas for perpetrating the worst massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust.